Welcome everyone to Not That Media. My name is John and in today's video I continue my series of videos relating to Monopoly Event's upcoming convention For the Love of Horror, which takes place on October 19th and 20th in Manchester, England. So come along with me, as in this video I talk a little bit about the Evil Dead reunion. One thing that each year I've been really impressed with for The Love of Horror is not just the variety of the guests in attendance, but also the cast reunions for certain films and franchises that they organise at the same time. At the time of recording, with less than a month to go, there are 33 currently confirmed guests attending this year's con. 2024 is a great year for film reunions with For the Love of Horror. There are 6 taking place, with The Thing, Night of the Demons, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, Halloween 1978, Halloween Season of the Witch, and The Evil Dead all getting reunions in one form or another. Now in 2024, with all of its various sequels, TV shows, spin-offs, comic books, video games, all the various paraphernalia that's been bolted onto this franchise, Evil Dead has become synonymous really with 2 things. The first is Bruce Campbell, and the second is the over-the-top, almost comic book level of violence and comedy. Now the original Evil Dead does have a dark sense of humour to it, and in my humble opinion, the only one of all the sequels and everything involved that has got close to that original tone is Evil Dead Rise. I actually find that the original Evil Dead, when viewed through the periscope of it being one self-contained film, it's actually a really dark and scary film, so much so that when I was younger and I was a teenager and I was on my quest to find as many horror films as humanly possible, I discovered Evil Dead, no, not via the Evil Dead DVD on its own or via a trilogy box set, but actually in a little remembered Anchor Bay release, which is the box of the band. Now there's actually 2 of these box sets, and this is the first one. Now box of the band, for those of you who are either perhaps too young or across the pond, this was a collection of what has been known in England as video nasties. Now, when video became more readily available and films could be made straight to video in the late 70s, early 80s, it's safe to say that a lot of the content was borderline pornographic and as offensive as humanly possible. The most morally corrupt imagery, violence and gore put on screen was taking place because there was no classifications on videotape and you could put anything you wanted on video, rather than having to go through the theatrical MPAA or the BBFC and things like that. Rather than put these films in the cinema heavily cut and heavily edited down, these things were getting made for video. Now, the problem is this stuff became so offensive, so outlandish, so gory, as I say, so borderline pornographic, that the BBFC, so the British Broadcasting Film Corporation, actually did come in and start to regulate these videos, and a significant number of videos were actually banned in the United Kingdom. And ironically, so just to give you a few names here so we can talk about the kind of films we're talking about here, you've got Nightmares in the Damaged Brain, I Spit on Your Grave, Zombie Flesh Eaters, Driller Killer. These films that have gone on to have these kind of legacies of being outright just disturbing horror, all became labelled as video nasties and were actually banned in the UK. It was illegal to own, distribute a copy of these films on VHS. You could go to prison, believe it or not, for owning, distributing certain materials that were listed as video nasties. Somehow, The Evil Dead ended up on the video nasty list, and there's an amazing story, just to give you a little bit of a side tangent, that Evil Dead is gory, it is shock horror, but it is nowhere near these other films. I mean, those other films are just gore in a bucket thrown at the screen with as many bare breasts and all these kind of things as humanly possible. The Evil Dead 1 is actually a very good film, not just when it comes to its splatter effects, but its use of tension, scenery, music, effects, acting. It's a great film, but unfortunately it found itself landed in the video nasty era, and Sam Raimi was actually called up on charges and had to come to, I think it was Leeds, Crown Court, or a court in Leeds, and actually had to defend his film to the BBFC. So much so that apparently, and take it with a splinter of salt, but apparently there was a very real possibility that if Sam Raimi was convicted, he would have gone to prison. So this is a film where its writer and director was being held to criminal charges by the UK for being so horrifically offensive. This is a franchise that has become known as fun and silliness and over-the-top campy effects and things like that. So I always find it fascinating that when people ask me, where did you first see Evil Dead? It was in this box of Banned, and as you can see, this box was advertised very clean cut, no special, nothing at all, just a list. The inside is exactly the same. It's not a review for this box, but literally it was as basic as humanly possible, because for a period of time it was considered offensive to own these materials. It literally is called the Box of Banned, which I just find so fascinating. Wrongfully, Evil Dead is in this box set, it has to be said, but when I found it, it created this fantastic prestige within this box. I only kept this box because of the Evil Dead, it has to be said, 1982's Evil Dead, and it actually says on the back, originally banned despite cuts, Raimi's genre-defining masterpieces has assured its place in the annals of shock horror movie history. On vacation, 5 college students unwittingly resurrect the Evil Dead. Agonizingly, the kids are possessed by demons, except for Ash, who alone must defend himself against marauding forces from beyond the grave. That is Evil Dead. That is Evil Dead in a nutshell. That's a really nice way of describing it. Couldn't say it better myself, but as I say, just as a little bit of a side fun, I just find it fascinating that this is where I found the Evil Dead. Whilst it doesn't deserve to be necessarily nicknamed a video nasty, I do think it is really important, particularly when people look at it in the context of all the Evil Dead franchise. The Evil Dead 1 was foremost a horror film. As I've already mentioned, 5 teenagers go to a cabin. One of them, Bruce Campbell's Ash, Ellen Sandwise's Cheryl, Betsy Baker's Linda, Teresa Tilly's Shelley, and Hal Delridge's Scott, go to a cabin. But the thing with this film is the second they get out of the car and they see the cabin, the tone is fantastic. Whilst Evil Dead is known for its splatter and its gore, the creeping dread, the cabin in itself is a character in the film. When you see it, you know something is not right. This is, whilst not necessarily original, some would argue, I think that many films have ripped off this kind of mood and this kind of tone, or attempts to replicate it, that when these 5 see the cabin, you just know bad things are going to happen. The chair swing is swinging backwards and forwards and banging against the side of the building, and the closer they get, it suddenly stops. When they discover a basement passageway and find a dagger, a set of tapes, and a book which has a face on it, there is an amazing film logic which I always enjoy, that in films characters have to be slightly stupider than a real human being. If you or I was in a cabin with a load of friends, maybe I've seen too many horror films, but if I was in a cabin and I found a knife with a skull on it, a book with a face on it, and some tapes, I'd leave. We're out of there. My film would be 5 minutes. We're gone. But Ash and Scott and the company have this great idea to play the tapes, despite the fact as well, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit, despite the fact that the character of Cheryl earlier in the film actually has her hand possessed and a book drawn on her paper, which eviscerates the paper in order to draw it, she doesn't elect to share that information with the rest of the group. Now again, if I was in a cabin with my wife and a few friends and someone came up and said, "You're not going to believe this, guys, my hand's just been possessed and I've just carved this picture," we're out of there, is what I would say. We're gone. See you later. So there's this fantastic slight stupidity to every character in The Evil Dead, which I think actually did tailor the future of the franchise, in that Ash became the lovable idiot. Like, he is put in circumstances where you would think a normal human being would turn tail and run away, and he does the opposite because he's got that, he retains the stupidity gene. So once Ash and Scott remove the Necronomicon and the dagger and the tapes from the basement, they have this fantastic idea to play the tapes. The tapes obviously recite the fact that the book is the Necronomicon, which is inked in human blood and bound in human human flesh, which is a human face on it, and the Kandarian dagger, which has a skull on the top. Again, a normal human being would probably stop the tape at this point and say, we need to leave, but they have the great idea to play the tape, despite Cheryl saying that she doesn't want it to be played. Once the Kandarian ritual is completed, Cheryl runs out into the woods and unfortunately is assaulted in the very worst way by the forest, or the entity in the forest that has been awoken. That is a scene that Sam Raimi himself has said that he regrets filming. I disagree. I think that actually, in today's context, it's a relatively lightweight scene. It's scary, it's creepy, it evokes a feeling. Any scene which involves an assault on a woman is obviously always going to be uncomfortable. But I think the legacy of people talking about that scene makes it a lot worse than it is when you watch that scene. So, but that's just my opinion. Once Cheryl returns to the cabin, obviously shaken and disturbed by what has happened, she becomes possessed. And it leads to one of two of my favourite Betsy Baker moments in the film, which is the possessed Cheryl stabs Linda, Betsy Baker's Linda, in the ankle with a pencil. With the exception of some stop motion footage at the end of the film, Evil Dead has pretty much all practical effects. This film is terrifyingly practical, an amazing labour of love. When you know how this film got made, it's a miracle it even happened. So when you see the pencil going in the ankle, again, it's some fantastic effects and things like that, but it feels so real. That popping sound when the pencil goes into Linda's ankle, to this day, still makes me feel uncomfortable, and in my humble opinion, is the very worst thing that ever happened to anybody in Evil Dead. Now, that's not to say that nothing bad happens to anybody else, but for me, a pencil in the Achilles heel is just the worst thing. I think it is, to give you a context, second place goes to, I think, Evil Dead Rise, where the mother is attempting to put the tattoo needle in the eye of somebody. That's as close to that kind of like, oh my god kind of moment that I get. So that kind of gives you a bit of a range, just in case you're thinking, oh, pencil in the ankle, that's nothing. Yeah, for me it's a big deal, but as I say, the tattoo gun to the eye is a close second. So I can stand a lot of violence, stand a lot of gore, a lot of horror, but the popping sound of a pencil in the ankle, no thank you. So after attacking Linda with the pencil, obviously Cheryl then goes after Ash, and it has to be said, one of the points that I like to raise about the original Evil Dead is that whilst the rest of the franchise would be regarded as the Bruce Campbell and the Ash show, in that Ash would rise to be the hero of the entire franchise, there's an interesting note that actually Scott, Hal Delrich's character, spends a good deal of time actually being as much a hero as Ash is in that film. He manages to subdue Cheryl. They put Cheryl in the basement, tie the latch down so that she cannot escape. Obviously she is visible and banging on there, saying the one by one we will take you, and those iconic lines and that iconic image of the deadite in the basement is conjured from that. But Scott and Bruce and Shelley are naturally, I should probably say Ash rather than Bruce, Ash, Shelley and Scott are naturally concerned for Linda, who has a gaping hole in her ankle. So they take her to put her in the other room, to clean her up, to look after her, to make sure she's okay. This is when Betsy Baker really starts to jump to the challenge. Betsy Baker plays that kind of cheerleader-esque girlfriend of Ash, who is just, you know, your typical blonde cheerleader character. She's there as Ash's girlfriend, great, you know, it's that typical kind of character. Until, of course, after being stabbed in the ankle, and it's a fantastic effect as well, her ankle spreads the curse or the possession, whatever you want to call it, and Linda becomes possessed. Now, possessed Linda, played by Betsy Baker, is iconic in my opinion, and frankly, not away from violence and away from all that kind of stuff, I actually think Betsy is one of the most terrifying parts of that film. Typically when a deadite becomes, you know, when a person becomes a deadite, they tend to attack and bite and rip and do all these different things, just exactly like Cheryl did and exactly like other people do later in the franchise. But Betsy Baker's Linda, the OG Linda, when possessed, actually is a lesson in absolute terror, in my opinion. When she appears, she sits in the doorframe smiling with this horrendous kind of like makeup face, this kind of like pretty doll face, and she's sitting there smiling away. She's got these contact lenses in, And just as a bit of a side note for you, those contact lenses are massive, and I believe they were glass, like old school glass contact lenses. The actors and actresses, once they had those in, they were blind. And from what Greg Nicotero explained about how those things were put in, they weren't like normal contact lenses that you kind of just open and just drop them. You needed kind of a gun, like an air pressure gun, to open the eye and kind of pop them into the eye. So, you know, Betsy Baker deserves all the credit, as well as everybody else who becomes possessed. That she is playing this character, this possessed deadite, blind, effectively. But she's sitting there and she has this giggle and this smile on her face, and she uses the immortal lines, "We're gonna get you." She's just terrifying in that original Evil Dead. And Ash, the terror and the fear and what am I going to do? Obviously, from Ash's perspective, this is his girlfriend who has been, you know, assaulted, tormented, is now possessed, and is now quite literally tormenting Ash. I find it fascinating that she spends so much time sitting doing nothing. When you watch the film, she's just sitting there. She could have got the better on Ash. She could have killed them all if she tried, if she'd actually really tried, if you look at that in those scenes. But instead, she plays quite a malicious or malevolent deadite who's just going to sit there and get in your head and giggle and make these weird high-pitched sounds. And as much as it is a physical assault in Evil Dead, she is a mental assault. And I think that Betsy Baker is fantastic in that scene. And one thing that I'm really on the fence about this, I haven't made my final decision yet, but Betsy Baker does a costume photo op as possessed Linda, and she looks fantastic. And I'm really on the fence whether or not to get that. But obviously with Linda possessed, Ash does the fantastic idea. He has the great idea, as you would, just to drag her outside and leave her. And obviously as things go on, Teresa Tilly Shelley then becomes possessed, and as I've already mentioned, it is up to Scott to put her down. She is a very frightening possessed deadite as well, and her evisceration, because the only way to take these things out is bodily dismemberment, is really uncomfortable. It's really disturbing. It's really sick. And again, obviously with Scott, Harold Elridge's character, he then decides he's going to try and escape, only to come back having been again somebody else who's been assaulted by the forest, and he eventually turns. So it's left to Ash to basically dispatch all of his friends. Now, what I wanted to talk about in a little bit of detail about these three people, Betsy Baker, Teresa Tilly and Hal Delridge, that I think if you've watched documentaries or if you've watched bits and pieces you will know about, but I do think goes unnoticed, is the fact that these three people were as tormented as Bruce Campbell. Now, the Evil Dead franchise is a bit of a running joke with Sam Raimi that it's the evolution of how much pain can he put on his best friend Bruce Campbell? How badly can he treat his friend? Now, I don't think that Sam Raimi is a malicious human being. I really don't. I think he's a really nice guy. But when you watch the behind-the-scenes footage of Betsy, Teresa, and Hal, and you see the gunk and the latex and the acrylic paint that was actually being put on their faces and on the makeup, the level of gloop that was being put in their mouths. There's a horrible outtake of Betsy Baker when she's outside with Ash having to drink this stuff, and you can hear her physically convulsing and feeling sick and struggling, and Sam Raimi in the background going, yeah, great, action. These three suffered for their craft. If they didn't have liquid in their mouths, they had pipe next to their face spitting this stuff out. If they didn't have that, they had dry ice machines or smoke machines up their jumpers to give away these effects. They're spitting milk, they're spewing ectoplasm all over the place. These three really suffer in this movie, but it's on screen. And the fact that all three of them are quite happy to talk about the film shows that there's clearly no lasting damage. But when you watch that film, that is a movie of guerrilla filmmaking. That is young people trying their best to make a film, and by their own admission, Sam Raimi, Rob Tapert and Bruce Campbell, none of them really truly had a clue what they were actually doing. So the fact that Betsy Baker, Teresa Tilly and Hal Delridge talk so positively about this film and are happy to be a part of it just shows that, you know, all wounds heal over time. But those three, they deserve medals as much, well, even Ellen Sandwise, all of them deserve medals as much as Bruce Campbell. But as I say, I think sometimes Bruce gets all the credit for being treated badly by Sam Raimi. But you go watch that first film, boy, no one's having a good time in that movie. I think Evil Dead is an amazing film. The franchise is fantastic, and some of the sequels arguably are better, you know, in terms of narrative or even effects, but I think The Evil Dead, the original 1981 film that took Sam Raimi, Rob Tapert and Bruce Campbell 2 years to get to the screen, that had Betsy Baker, Teresa Tilly and Hal Delridge and Ellen Sandwise literally giving everything, blood, sweat and tears. The fact that they all stayed in that cabin while they were filming for 3 weeks, the fact that so much of it is practical, it's all in the camera, the fact that it has some of the most brutal scenes you will ever see and yet so much dark humour, I think is a film that should be recognised and should be on every single horror fan's shelf. Say what you want about Bruce Campbell and his goofiness later on, say what you want about the later franchise, but The Evil Dead, if you have not seen The Evil Dead, I strongly recommend you watch it. That original 1981 film. Don't worry about the rest of the franchise, don't worry about the spin-offs and all the other bits and pieces, just watch it as a self-contained, isolated horror film. I think you will be really impressed. Yes, it's a little rough around the edges. Yes, sometimes you do see the pipes, you know, and things like that, but that's all part of the charm. This is a fantastic story behind the scenes of a group of kids desperate to make a film, and making a film that Stephen King himself said was one of the best films he'd ever seen. This was at a time when Stephen King's name was gold. Obviously, you know, Stephen King, to this day, some people will have their various different opinions, but back in 1981, if Stephen King said something was great, that thing was going to be great. And Evil Dead was fantastic at the time. It took a little while to get started, actually, it has to be said. The film was not an immediate success. It became a success on video, and people borrowing it and sending it and sharing it. Like I've already said, finding it in different contexts, such as the box of the band, realizing it was this recognized as this video nasty, all adds to the fantastic legacy that is the Evil Dead movie. So when I go to For the Love of Horror, most of the time I'm getting Blu-rays and DVD sleeves signed. So I don't normally show them on this video because I just don't see any point, because you can get them pretty much anywhere. For the Evil Dead trio, I wanted to get something signed a little bit different, because, you know, being a fan of Evil Dead, I have been fortunate before, you know, it became big again, things like, to get my hands on a few items. So I'm going to go for things a little bit differently this time. It is a DVD, but I just wanted to show this. So I'm going to get the limited edition, the Evil Dead Book of the Dead DVD, released in 2002 by Anchor Bay. This is a fantastic replica of the Necronomicon from the movie, and one of the things that I really liked about it, not when I bought it, but obviously when you sit down to decide what you're going to get people to sign, is that quite nicely you can see it's got the various bits and pieces from the movie in it, which is fantastic, but it's also got two very nice clean pages. So I thought, well, if we're going to get the trio together, Betsy, Teresa and Hal, why not get them to sign The Evil Dead, the book itself, which would be a lot of fun. I'm sure they've signed them before in the past, but, you know, I just wanted to show this one off sometimes because I do think it's a really cool collector's item, and it's not one I see that often, or when I do see them, they're not necessarily in the best of conditions. I don't know quite what people do to their Blu-rays to cause some of the pictures I've seen, but I've looked after this for 20 odd years now, and it'll be a real pleasure to take it to the trio and get their signatures on it. So I think that's going to do it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and if you haven't already, do like and subscribe, and do check out the playlist for the other members of the guest lineup that I will be meeting this year. As I've said before, at the time of recording, there are 33 people attending, and after a couple of cancellations, which can't be helped, I'm currently scheduled to meet 18, but that might go up to 21 depending on a film I'm watching very shortly, so there may be an additional video regarding that film as well if I decide I want to meet those people. October, naturally going into spooky season, I'm hoping to put out a lot of content. I've got 4 or 5 things lined up, so do keep an eye out for that. They involve going to things like the Halloween farm at Cato's Farm, the Alton Towers Scare Fest, For the Love of Horror, and concluding with the Dark Arts at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. I'm sure there will be some different things in there as well, Halloween related, but really excited to be at the con, really excited to go for my 4th year, meet a whole plethora of guests. If you do see me vlogging, because I will be there with the camera, do come up and say hello. I'm early days on the channel, but I appreciate any of the positivity comments I've been receiving and do try to respond as quickly as I can. But if you see me and you want to say hello, do come on over. So until next time, stay scared.
We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you. Not another piece.